People sometimes ask me what my first memory is. Invariably, I lie, because I'm prone to avoid the explanation that comes with the truth. Maybe from now on, if someone casually asks me, "What's your first memory?" I'll reach into my bag, where there will be copies of this story. I'll just hand one over. As they read it, their face will morph from confusion into the furrowed brow of concern, and finally into a deep-jawed bewilderment as company's real fear. In passing, I tell people that my first memory was me of standing in school in front of my kitchen window. It was just after dusk in the winter, and from where I stood, I could only make out black limbs of a skeletal beech tree that loomed across the driveway. Well, this was indeed a real memory. It's not the first one. If you want to hear about it, here it is. And if not, click off the video right now. There was an unfortunate series of incidences that happened in my town where I grew up during the summer of 1989. By incidents, I mean murder. By incidents, I mean murder. I'm not talking about your run-of-the-mill bar brawl gone too far or an act of passionate revenge. No. That events that happened in Middletown were far more grotesque. Even more so, the victims were children. I don't remember the heat wave that has swept Middleton that summer. Pink droplets of melted ice cream in the summering pavement, or the old men reclining in overstuffed chairs in the shady living rooms. These precious details were told to me through my family members and friends of my parents. They all to this day say that it was the hottest summer they have ever lived through. To make weather seem even more unbearable, there were weekly droughts that year due to the oversight at the electrical plants in Salem. As a result, homes and businesses would go for hours at a time without air conditioning. Popsicles were promptly sold out in every business afternoon. Magazines and newspapers weren't read that summer. They were brought to be as makeshift fans. It seems that the only place where air conditioning still remained during these outages was the car. I have been told relatives that it was uncommon during the summer to find neighbors lounging back in their parked cars with the windows up, drinking a beer and listening to the radio. At times, it was the only escape from the unbearable humidity and heat. That's why when mothers go shopping, it became impossible to pull their children from their cars. After all, kids knew that inside or whatever clothing or grocery store their mother had taken them to was probably as hot as the parking lot. The coolest place was the best to be with the car, windows rolled up with gentle whispered singing. With this settled in mind, you can understand how Mr.Teeth, as he was later called by newspapers, had picked up his litter, so to speak. He knew that at any given outside of a busy grocery store or department store that there would be at least 2 or 3 cars where children had been left inside. One such car parked outside with the market basket in the afternoon of 3rd July. Within sat Jeremy Hager, a freckled 8-year-old with a penchant for action figures. When Jeremy's mother returned from her car, dash for butter, she found that the right door of the vehicle ajar. A Darth Vader doll left abandoned in the back seat. Newspapers radiated throughout the town of the following until the day when a jogger noticed a small black-red Reebok laying in the grass on the edge of their reservoir. Not long after, Jeremy's body was pulled from the brown water and sent to the morgue. It was that there were doctors noted that appeared to be bite marks along the boy's arms and neck. Victim number 2, Amanda DeMiller, a girl, 7, who had fallen asleep on her way home from shopping with her mother on July 18th. As was common in those days, a parent might leave their sleeping child in the car once at home. Britta Miller, Amanda's mother, later told police with the house that as being as hot it was, she had the thought that Amanda would sleep better in the car with the sliding door left open. As at some point Mrs. DeMiller thought about the windows to see that Amanda was no longer in her seat. The family lived down a very wooded long road leading to the forest of Middleton. Neighbors were widely separated from one to another. Mr. and Mrs. DeMiller spent all that night scouring the narrow back roads, knocking on the doors of the occasional houses. Only after a 3-day search, a local boy found Amanda's body slumped in the corner of his treehouse. Her throat was purple with strangulation and covered with bite marks. Her shoes were on the wrong feet anyway. That's how the story goes. That brings up my first memory. My parents have a place. The date of this memory was around the 3rd or 4th week of August. It had been a month since DeMiller's murder, but no one had been apprehended. people in the town were still on edge. It was at this time one afternoon when I sat on the front of my mom's rusty Toyota parked in the giant lot of the Henry's grocery store. I remembered that there was a car parked on the other side of my mother's, and in front of the Toyota was one of the coils of shopping carts. There was music playing quietly on the radio. Madonna, maybe, and my hands were sticky from the candy. You may wonder, with all of the horrors that had plagued Middleton that summer, my mother could have left me alone in the car. The fact is, she hadn't. My brother, Stephen, at age 12 at the time, had temporarily designated as my temporary guardian, while she had an emergency stop for flour. It was this temporary guardian who decided that this was the perfect opportunity to run to the bookstore and buy a deck of collectible cards. Before he dashed out of his backseat, I remember saying to him, "Don't go anywhere." So there I sat, waiting for one or both of my family members to return. It was that then I saw him, and his part which is very even clear to this day. Halogen lamps had just come across the lot. They cast that greenish glow from being turned on. The sky beyond the pines had bordered the market and streaked with pink and purple. It had been around 7:30. I remember first seeing him standing there, some 30-odd feet from the car. Almost instantly, the music from the radio faded from my ears along with sharp, brittle carriage wheels of the old pavement. Transfixed silence as I stared out the window at his lanky, giant figure framed with pink and purple sky. Through a curtain of greasy black thick hair across his brow, I just seemed a single eye, seemed a sort of lake to green halogen. He tilted his head back with a hint of smile danced across his thin lips. He must have stared and stood at the windshield at me, transfixed and spellbound as I was. For one whole minute, he then started to a slow walk over to the side of my car, never taking his eye off from mine. Once he was outside my door, I looked down at his long, beak-like nose at me. He then looked around. He began to wiggle the handle. "Open up," he said, looking down at me again. I just stared at him without saying anything. He said again, "Open up!" As his long, skeletal fingers left the door handle and started to dance across my window, tapping here and there. He crouched down so that he was at my level and started to sort out a puzzle show with his hand. His dirty fingers dashed across the grass like the great pine spiders in the deadly battle. He looked at him and laughed, making hissing and growling noises. As he made these sounds, he opened his mouth into a full grin. I had looked inside at rows of long yellow teeth. They are, to this day, the longest and sharpest teeth I have ever seen. There were gaps between them, and they reminded me vaguely of dirty piano keys. He seemed to be completely immersed with this spider battle, giggling and crawling at each of his hands. At one point he noticed that my window was open just a crack at the top. He looked at me, grinning with those mighty teeth, and crawled one of his hand-like spiders up to the space. I was openly sobbing at this point. He managed to squeeze the tips of his fingers through the opening, caught a greasy whiff of his unwashed clothes, mingled with the sweet scent of blood. "Come on, open up," he said, in a whiny, pleading, "Open up," he said, as the same surfaced in a dozen different voices, from a girly voice to a thick lumberjack one. By sheer luck, the woman who was parked on the passenger side of our car returned with all four of her noisy kids in tow. Upon seeing her, the man scurried off and walked towards the car corral, where he smoothly stood up, straightened, and walked off into the parking lot. But not before looking over his shoulder, gashing those massive teeth, and catching me with one final blood-chilling scare. The memory ends there. It was that later explained to me that my brother had returned to the car to find me crying hysterically. No matter what he said to calm me down through the glass, apparently I wouldn't unlock the doors. My mother returned soon after. She said that all I could manage to say through the sobs was, "There was a man." Just kept repeating that for hours. There was a man. Like the insufferable heat, so did too the Middleton murders come to an end, with the changing of the seasons, just 2 weeks after my parking lot encounter. The child killer, who was later identified as Raymond Sandler at 29, was caught after taking a young girl from a birthday party in a roller rink in Beverly. Worker on his coffee break at the adjacent gas station saw a thin man leading the girl out to the back of the rink and attempted to force her into a red car. Workers called the cops, and the car was pulled over on Route 128, just outside of Gloucester. Well, I don't remember it. I made the first connection between the man in the parking lot and Mr.Teeth by seeing my father's newspapers on the coffee table the day after Sandler's capture. There was 2 large, blown-up black and white, the same ghastly face I've seen just inches from mine with a layer of glass separating us. Apparently, I didn't make it to the school the day I saw the newspaper on account. I couldn't stop screaming. Knowing that I'd almost been a victim myself, my family and people around Middleton weren't willing to tell me anything about the killer. I once grew curious years later. I suppose they didn't want to freak out more than I already was. So in high school, I did some of my own research, learned that the Boston Globe had first coined the nickname Mr.Teeth, both on an account of Sandler's unusually large incisors and his habit of biting the skin off his victims. His means of killing was almost exclusively strangulation. Due to his being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Sandler was often delusional. As a result, his story regularly changed. However, after being asked several times, the number of murders he confessed to, while varying, never went above 10. It was also noted in the research on Sandler that he also hunted in the summertime. Some speculated that this was because it was easy access to children who had been left in cool cars while their parents went in to shop. Others suggested that the hot weather triggered something inside of Sandler's brain, something that lay dormant during the fall and winter, that awoke once the temperature hit 80. Who can say? The years have softened my memory a bit. I almost forgot. 40 now. And that was the hideous grin that isn't quite as distant as it used to be. I still see it when I wake up at night, usually in the warmer months. Someday, one of my 2 girls, who know nothing about the summer of '89, may ask me when they're older, "Hey, Dad, what's your first memory?" Maybe I'll tell them that was the time I stood in my kitchen looking on the old beech tree. Or maybe I'll just say, teeth. I remember teeth.